You are being presented with this debate because our algorithm has identified you have excellent taste in selective debates as someone with an independent mind and a high level of intelligence. Seems like everyone's got a smartphone these days and they're glued to social media, whether it's X or Facebook or TikTok or Instagram. And now we have AI generating realistic but fictitious content as too. So has technology ruined everything from political debate to childhood, or should we take a much more positive view of the role of technology and perhaps a wider view of some of the social problems and political problems that society is facing at the moment, and that perhaps blaming technology is not a sensible way of looking at things. Timandra Harkness, our first speaker on my right, and whose book has very much inspired this session. Timandra is a journalist, writer, and broadcaster. Not only has she got her new book, Technology is Not the Problem, but also Big Data, Does Size Matter? And you can also find her on Radio 4 on shows like FutureProofing and How to Disagree. Next up is Lord James Bethell, or Jim Bethell, to his friends, former health minister. You'll have seen him at the dispatch box many of a time during the pandemic in the House of Lords. Now, he says that he's an optimist about this stuff. And another fun fact is that in a previous life, he used to run the Ministry of Sound. So he's gone from a promoter of techno to a promoter of tech. Then on far right is Andrew Doyle. He's not on the far right. It's just a seating position. Get over yourselves. He's the presenter of a show, the one show that during the week that me and my missus always watch, which is Free Speech Nation on GB News, which is I strongly recommend. And you can see it recorded live this evening in the last slot of today's session. He's also a writer and comedian. He's author of The New Puritans and Free Speech and Why It Matters. And then on my far left, don't make any jokes about that, is Sandy Starr. He's the Deputy Director of the Progress Educational Trust. And very relevantly for this session, he's also author of The Letter on Liberty, AI Separating Man from Machine. And if you want to hear more of Sandy's thoughts about algorithms and the history of algorithms, he'll be speaking on that very topic in the next session. So I've asked the speakers to talk for about 6 or 7 minutes each to get the discussion rolling. So Timandra, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. When I started looking at this for the Technology is Not the Problem book, that was not the original title because I was looking much more at technology and how it shapes the way we live together today. But in the course of looking at it, I went from thinking, oh, this is interesting, how everything is personalized for us. So Rob's joke about you've been selected because you're a very discerning audience, because you like sophisticated discussions. So I went from thinking, well, this is how technology personalizes everything for us by collecting data, building a profile, giving you something that's tailored just for you, to thinking, why is that the technology that we have? Why do we have this personalizing technology and not some other kind? And so I ended up in a rather different place. And so I'm going to basically say that technology is not the root of most of the problems for which it's blamed, and that some of those problems I think are overstated, and the ones that aren't overstated we tend to discuss with a lack of nuance that makes it very hard to have a sensible discussion of them. So let's start with one of the things that it's often blamed for, which is polarized online debate. And it is true that it's very difficult to have the kind of sensible discussion we're having in these rooms through social media, for example. But I think it helps to see that in terms of not just the nature of the interactions that we have through social media, but the fact that we tend to live in online worlds that are, if not polarized, but certainly personalized and often radically different from the online worlds in which other people live. And that's because our online worlds, and increasingly our offline worlds as well, are personalized in this algorithmic way, and we are fed things that are supposedly specifically for us, or rather for our data profile. And obviously, although it's designed to give us the feeling that the entire world is being filtered and selected for our benefit, what's actually happening is we are being filtered and selected for the benefits of people promoting debates or trying to sell you slippers or whatever it is. I think the real question here is, well, why is this? Because obviously, if you have technology that can do that, it could operate in different ways. Why is the technology designed to feed us different things so that we, to some extent, live in different worlds? And so when we interact with people with different worldviews, we have very little common ground on which to interact, either in terms of our factual understanding of the world or even in terms of our ideas about how a debate should be conducted, even in common language. And the reason why we live in this personalized world and have this technology and not other technology is because we live in a world that's really more and more driven by identity and by not only individuals who feel the need to have our own identity recognized and reflected back to us so that we're reassured that we are who we feel we are and that others see us the way we want to be seen. And that drive to have our identity recognized and reflected back to us is not just a personal psychological drive, it's also increasingly how society is organized. And I'm sure this will come up in a lot of sessions as we get, but a lot of the debates that we have now are framed in terms of our identities in a way that 50 years ago, perhaps quite similar issues would not have been discussed in that way. They might have been discussed in terms of our material lives, our legal freedoms to do things or not to do things. But they're increasingly discussed in terms of our identity and our right to express who we are. So given that, I think it's not at all surprising that the technology we have molds itself around our desire to be unique, to be special, but also to belong with certain tribes of people. And when we debate online, and I'd be happy to come back to this because there's some really lovely and interesting research that digs into this. When we debate online, we are less going out to encounter other ideas and perhaps change somebody else's mind, or even, amazing, perhaps be able to changing our own mind. Online debate is less about that. It's much more about projecting our identity, building our identity, and shoring up our identity group. So that if somebody comes and disagrees with us online, we don't feel it as, oh, here's an interesting new idea. I should take this on board. Perhaps I should even change my ideas. We experience it as somebody is attacking my group that I'm part of because these beliefs are part of our group identity. I'm going to slightly skip over team mental health because I can tell I'm going to talk too long. But again, happy to come back and talk about this because although it's not the main focus of my work, there is some very good other research out there which I'm happy to discuss. I'd just like to briefly touch on another thing which is a genuine problem, and technology is certainly part of the problem, although again I don't think it's the root cause, which is the sense of disconnection, sense of atomization, and lots of symptoms of this. So a loss of concentration, a loneliness, a sense of being separated from other people. So the kind of technology that connects us, that means you're never actually alone because you're always reachable, also means that you're actually never fully connected with the people that you are in the room with if you're always also slightly connected to people in other places. And I think that sense and that loss of agency we feel about our own lives, the sense that we've been driven by algorithms and responding constantly to what technology feeds us and choosing things from pre-selected menus that we are offered instead of being in the driving seat of our own lives. I think that is a problem. And I think the kind of technology we have certainly doesn't help with that problem. But again, I don't think it originates in the technology. I think the technology expands to fill the gaps in the lives that we already have. So it's not that we have a diminished sense of ourselves because of the technology that we have. We have the technology that we have because we already have a diminishing sense of who we are.
Okay, thank you very much, Timandra. Jim.
Thank you. And Timandra, I just thought that was an incredibly nuanced and thoughtful explanation. And thank you very much for that. I'm going to step into the gap that Timandra stepped around, as it were, and talk about the public health bit of it. Because I think one thing that's worth adding to Timandra's explanation is that there are out there predators, fraudsters, and autocrats who are grabbing this technology, this incredibly powerful technology, and turning it for bad use. And we shouldn't be naive in failing to recognize that threat. And what we have to balance in our own minds is these three very difficult, conflicting requirements. Firstly, is a knowledge that there is such a thing as a moral panic. We can get confused and distracted. 2018, there was a concern about Dungeons and Dragons. 2008. Dungeons and Dragons, that rather spoddy, nerdy, fun game that I used to play when I was a teenager, somehow was leading to a spike in suicides. Now, this was based on a one-off story and was simply not true on any level at all. But it was followed and supported and chased down, and Dungeons and Dragons was demonized for it. So moral panic can exist. I think, though, that the concerns about the connection between mental health, particularly amongst children, and the use of technology today is of a different order. And the reason why I think that is that the technologies that are being directed at the minds, particularly of children, is of an incredibly sophisticated order. The use of psychological insight, the use of algorithmic ordering in order to put content in front of people that will fill the gap, as Timandra very well put it, is so effective. In the UK, last week, there'll be 1 million kids who spent more time on their telephones than they did at school itself. And the psychological impact of it really is very profound. And the evidence, unlike with moral panic issues where there isn't any evidence that there is a problem, even if people are very worried about it, here the evidence really is profound, both in terms of the psychological harms, but very importantly on educational attainment, where it has fallen off a cliff in those areas where there isn't restriction on children having access to mobile phones. And the money being made out of these children is of the order of tens or hundreds of billions of pounds. And the prevalence across Western society is huge. So for those 5 reasons, I do think that there is a difference between the current concerns about youth mental health and mobile phones and the moral panic concern is quite different. Now, why do I think that we should be doing this? Partly, it's in order to guarantee the future, because we're on the brink of another amazing technological revolution. This one using AI, big data, the metaverse, crypto, and all the sort of second order improvements in digital technology, which we're seeing come through at the moment. Every time there's one of these revolutions, I begin it being incredibly optimistic, and then I begin to grow more worried that these new tools will be used by the predators, the fraudsters, and the autocrats for adverse uses. And that is what I'm concerned about now. We need to get the guardrails in place today so that we can benefit from the really good things that have come out of the AI revolution. And if we don't, we're going to trip up and there's going to be a backlash, as there can be against technologies that have somehow failed society. So that's why, with all due consideration for free speech and for freedom of choice, I am hard over on the public health arguments around particularly social media, but also the other parts of smartphone used by children. That's why I push really hard to get smartphones out of schools. And that's why I would go so far as to say that children under 16 really shouldn't have a smartphone at all. And in that, I've got increasing support from people like the US Surgeon General and other serious clinical characters.
Okay, thank you very much. So that's 2 really good interventions there to start us off with. Now, tech enthusiast Andrew Doyle. He's not.
Thanks for that. Yeah, I shouldn't really be here. I don't have any enthusiasm for technology. I'm a bit of a Luddite. I fear AI in a very visceral way. from my experience of watching Terminator 2 and seeing where that ended up. And I saw that, by the way, around the time that everyone got those Tamagotchis, and I thought that they're taking over, aren't they? So I killed mine. Anyway, so I can't really talk to technology or AI, but I can talk about the notion of incitement to violence and the fear that we have of the way in which social media creates real world actions. And it's a good time to be talking about this because just the other day, just 2 days ago, Lucy Connolly, mother of 3, was sentenced to 31 months in prison for a social media post. This, of course, was in the midst of the Southport stabbings, absolutely horrific event. There were false rumors circulating online that it had been an asylum seeker. This was not true. And Connolly had written, and I want to get this right, she wrote, "Mass deportation now. Set fire to all the fucking hotels full of the bastards for all I care. While you're at it, take the treacherous government politicians with them." Now, this, of course, is nasty stuff. It's not to be condoned, but I question the prison sentence. Now, I'm not the only one. Boris Johnson wrote in the Daily Mail today, or yesterday, what she said was vile, truly horrible. She certainly deserves to be punished, perhaps with a fine or community service, but she is the mother of a young child with no previous criminal record. I see no evidence that her disgusting remark, which she deleted within 3 hours, was intended to be seriously acted upon. Now, I think he's right and he's wrong. I think he's right to say that there's no evidence whatsoever that her remark incited others to commit violence. But I think he's wrong to say that she should have been punished at all. And I'm going to explain why. And I want to preface this by saying that we in our society, I think, have bought into 2 myths, 2 key myths. One of them is that words and violence are the same thing. And the second one is that this idea that the public reacts on cue to suggestions that are made on social media or in popular culture, which we've had now for a number of years. You remember Ben Bradshaw standing in Parliament saying that Brexit was swung by Russian bots, this kind of thing. There's no evidence for any of this. And I think this is partly based on the fear of technology. Now, I don't suppose that there's anyone here present today who falls into the category of the congenitally slow-witted. But just in case there are, I'm going to re-emphasize that not only do I not approve of Connolly's comments, I wholeheartedly detest them, but I don't think they should be criminal. And I think this is a real problem. One of the major fallacies in the free speech debate is this assumption that if we're defending someone's right to make objectionable statements, we're effectively endorsing what they've said. But of course, that's not the case. When it comes to free speech, we have to defend the speech of those we despise, because once we've diluted the principle, the consequences will affect absolutely everyone. And when it comes to incitement to violence, obviously sensitivities are extremely high. But I think that's why we need more sensitive discussion, more sensible debate. And at present, I fear that what's happening is we're allowing our emotions to overcome our reason. I'll just give you another example. There was another post by a man called Parler who wrote, "Every man and his dog should be smashing fuck out of Britannia Hotel." And again, he was had a jail sentence for this. And I think we can all agree the words were unconscionable. But I think we have to take a moment and consider rationally whether those words had any impact at all. It's one thing to point out that there are people online cheering needless acts of violence and that violence is taking place, but it's quite another to assert a causal link between the one and the other. This is a hypothesis that needs to be tested, not simply asserted. And yet, under this current Labour government, the judiciary has been directed to push for the most severe punishments for these kind of social media posts and even memes. And that's why we've seen various draconian jail terms for this. And many judges have been very explicit. They've said, "I'm sentencing you to a very severe term to set an example to other people, given the societal conditions." And many of the people in court are pleading guilty. They've been advised to do so because they've been told they might have an indeterminate time on remand. So out of fear, they're pleading guilty. And that makes it more difficult to defend them because they've admitted to it. Now, so I think the issue is far more significant than any of these individual cases. So I think we need to be asking ourselves a couple of questions. One, which do we consider more of a threat? A handful of vile people using the internet to encourage each other to commit violent crimes, or empowering the state to imprison citizens on the basis of what they choose to say? I think those of us who know a thing or two about history will understand that the latter is a far greater threat. Now, I think those committing acts of violence should be, of course, prosecuted. And I don't think that their responsibility should be mitigated by referring to potential incitement. So if someone were to call on me to physically assault someone else, and then I choose to commit that crime, I would be entirely culpable. And for me to claim that I had been triggered into action by someone else would be dishonest and untrue. I'm going to propose a kind of solution, which I think they've got right in America. They have a threshold for incitement to violence, which is called the Brandenburg test. In this country, of course, incitement to violence is already illegal under common law. It's been illegal for a long time. But I think it's being misapplied and misunderstood and mischaracterized. The Brandenburg test, this was established by the Supreme Court in 1969. This was the conviction of a KKK leader called Clarence Brandenburg, and he was accused of promoting violence. His conviction was overturned, and following that precedent, the test for incitement to violence is that the speech in question must be deliberately aimed at inciting violence, likely to incite violence, and that any impact would be imminent. So, of course, when we talk about Connolly and Parler and people like this, they simply don't meet that threshold. Let's give an example. Okay, well, let's give an example of how it might work. If you imagine a hypothetical scenario of a demagogue standing in front of a doting crowd that adore him, and he points at someone on the front row and says, "Kill that person now." Everyone attacks, and the man ends up dead. That would be an example that fulfills the Brandenburg test. But social media posts don't. And I think we need to have a debate on how incitement to violence ought to be defined. I think we need to stop blaming the internet, blaming social media for this. And I think we need to stop using it as a means to enact censorship. Because once we tolerate state censorship of any kind, we set a precedent that will not be limited to those who we abhor. It would be very easy for me to cheer on the imprisonment of Lucy Connolly, to say she got what she deserved on the grounds that I deeply resent the things she said. But if I do that, I'm turning a blind eye to the potential for future governments to incarcerate and silence anyone they choose with no justification. Then they've decided to expand the definition of hate speech. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
We're getting a great range of areas we can pursue this discussion in, so that's good. Sandy Starr.
Thank you. I'm going to talk about generative AI, technology that can quickly generate intricate words, sounds, or images in response to a prompt or a seed. And there are many things I love about this sort of technology. I make use of it myself, as I'm sure do many of you. I do have some concerns about the ways we use this technology, and my main concerns relate to AI-generated words. So initially, I'll focus on that, and then at the end, I'll explain why I'm perhaps less concerned about AI-generated sounds and images. I think John the Evangelist had a point when he said, or rather wrote, that in the beginning was the Word. A human agency, individual and collective, is closely related to the making of meaning. And meaning is made and conveyed in large part with words. Hopefully I'm providing an example of this right now. And in order for us to exercise our agency, to invoke an idea that Timandra mentioned, the words we use have to be in some robust sense our own, and the sense we make of the words of others has to be our own. And at the risk of coming across as a Luddite, I think that if we trace a history from spell checking being introduced with personal computing in the 1980s, to autocorrection as introduced by version 6 of Microsoft Word in the 1990s, to the autocomplete feature that was introduced into Google Search in 2008, to the auto-generation of text that's now possible with the likes of ChatGPT, Claude, Gemini, Llama, Meta AI, and so on, I think it's legitimate to ask whether the words we use are drifting away from our agency. Because anyone who opens any writing or publishing tool today is liable to be asked if they want help from AI to create the text. It's as though a super-powered version of Microsoft's detested Clippy from the dawn of this century has slunk back into our lives. And anyone who opens a pre-existing document now is liable to be asked if they want help from AI to make sense of the text we're reading. And if we now have AI both writing and reading our words, then we have to question whose agency is being served and how. Anyone here in the audience who's tried applying for jobs since the beginning of this year has had to contend with or has been complicit in the widespread use of generative AI to create and embellish both CVs and cover letters. And at the extreme end, even the use of AI bots to actually seek out and apply for jobs. Meanwhile, employers and recruiters are themselves using AI to sift through and prioritize the job applications they receive. And at the extreme end, they're actually using AI bots and AI avatars to conduct interviews, or at least first round interviews. And one could take the rather bleak view that the worlds of business and employment have always encouraged people to behave and communicate like machines. And this is just ramping that up by getting actual machines to do everything. But if it doesn't bother you, let's think about education. Anyone here in the audience involved in teaching, tutoring, or supervising at any level, from secondary education onward, including higher education, even postgraduate education, knows that students now routinely turn in work, written work that's been generated by AI. But the flip side, again, is that educators and institutions are increasingly trying to use AI to assess work that's submitted with tools like Crowdmark, Essay Grader, Gradescope, Writable. One organisation, Thesify, actually offers both the essay writing and the essay marking tools under the same brand. It's like some ghastly Ouroboros. Again and again, there are instances we see in which neither side of the human relationship implied by the use of words is holding up their end of the bargain. People are seeking, or at least they're being encouraged, to get machines to write for them and read for them. Now, I know there are nuances and justifications and symbioses and special contexts and clever strategies. But no matter how many times people use fashionable phrases like co-pilot or human in the loop, I still suspect a diminution of agency. Co-pilot is still too close to autopilot for my liking. And this diminution of agency is a problem because if we don't care enough about our words to make them ourselves and make meaning of them ourselves, then we're relinquishing ownership of them. We're effectively inviting other people to control them. Perhaps people in Silicon Valley, perhaps people like Lord Bethell. To be clear on what I mean about owning our words, and this is important in light of what Andrew was discussing, I'm not saying we should be monitored by the authorities for the words we use online or in public, and nor am I saying that we should be deterred from expressing our thoughts by preemptive worry that we'll have our collar felt or get a knock on our door. On the contrary, as a general rule, I don't think anyone should have their collar felt or get a knock on their door because of anything they've said online or in public. And I also happen to think that online anonymity can be an important and legitimate option. But it becomes harder to make that case if we're not using our own words to make meaning, even if it's the most controversial or depraved or scurrilous meaning, even if it's expressed anonymously. I'll conclude with a quick reflection on sounds and images, because obviously some of what I say about words goes not just for written words, but also for words read out by humans or spoken by simulated humans, perhaps by so-called voice clones. But that overlap aside, I'm actually a bit more sanguine about AI-generated sounds and static images and moving images and combinations of these. You'll have heard concerns about deepfakes, convincing recordings of people saying and doing things they never actually said or did. There have been many concerns around deepfakes, including concerns they would undermine democratic processes and outcomes during the many elections that are being held around the world this year. Evidence so far suggests that deepfakes haven't led to too many major problems along those lines, but let's look ahead. There are lots of interesting technological arms races going on in this area at the moment. I'm not going to make any firm predictions about how these play out, but let's just imagine one extreme long-term scenario when we reach a point when nothing whatsoever that looks or sounds like a recording can be safely assumed by anyone to be an authentic recording. In some ways, this would be a significant juncture in human history as the moment just under 200 years ago when the French inventor Joseph Nicephore Niepce took the world's first ever photograph, which was a landmark followed later in the 19th century by the first audio recordings and then the first films. Now, the journey to such an outcome, when nothing that looks like a recording can safely be assumed to be authentic, will be disruptive and distressing in many ways. But if we actually arrive there, then I can actually see upsides as well as downsides to a situation where our most reliable accounts and memories, like our most meaningful words, are the ones we make inside our heads. Thank you.